Welcome to the Language of Ahava podcast. It's a podcast for young families. So the question is, what happens when a rabbi and an early childhood teacher walk into a podcast together? I think it's going to be lots and lots of fun. But what do we know? I am the early childhood teacher, Karen Deerwester, and this is Rabbi David Steinhardt, senior rabbi at B'nai Torah congregation of Boca Raton, Florida. Rabbi, what makes you want to be a co-host on a podcast?
One of the essential aspects of what I'm doing is creating community. And I believe that we create community in order to allow people to deepen connections to other people. So this past year, we all learned how much we miss being in person or being connected to people. And we've got to work on it. We've got to continue to work on it. You do Ahavat Shabbat. The word Ahavat, at the center of that word is Hav, which means give. So we have to be giving to each other. I want to do this with you.
And this is it. This is what happens when a rabbi and a teacher get in the room. What I'm hoping to bring to this is the teacher in me, the early childhood person, believes in those connections in families, in children. Rabbi sees it at the deepest level in community, in Jewish community. And we are ready. So we will be here for you every other Friday, posting something to help you make new connections to yourselves, to your children, to community, to the world, to meaning, to purpose. Rabbi, anything else that the rabbi perspective brings to our listeners?
Well, it's funny because I want to jump off of that to tell you that although I am a rabbi and I have been not only leading Jewish communities, but have been observing Jewish communities for all these years, I truly believe in learning. And I am convinced now at the age that I am that my greatest learning has come from my children and my grandchildren, so that I want to be able to bring that from a very personal perspective to this too.
Thank you for being with us, because Rabbi brings so many pieces. I hope I bring a few pieces that will help us become better listeners, better connectors, as we find a way to give a little ahava, as we share love, connect to love, because when you give a little ahava, you make this world a better place. Here comes this episode. Welcome to the Language of Ahava podcast, a podcast for families with young children. So the question is, what happens when a rabbi and an early childhood teacher walk into a podcast together? I think it's going to be fun. I'm Karen Deerwester. I'm the early childhood teacher. And this is Rabbi David Steinhardt, senior rabbi at B'nai Torah congregation of Boca Raton, Florida. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thanks, Karen. I'm happy to be here.
Podcast. Why do you want to co-host a podcast?
As a rabbi, I'm really
Start again. I'm sorry. Welcome to the Language of Ahava podcast, a podcast for families with young children. So what happens when a rabbi and an early childhood teacher walk into a podcast together? I think it's going to be fun. I'm Karen Deerwester. I'm the early childhood teacher.
I'm David Steinhardt. I'm the senior rabbi at B'nai Torah. Really looking forward to doing this. Karen?
We are co-hosts. And what the early childhood person brings, we hope, is that perspective that says, no matter what your child is doing, the challenges, the messes, the contradictions, the insanity, the trying to be the best parent person you are, is all going to be okay. Your child is normal, and messiness is part of living with kids. What does a rabbi bring to a podcast about Ahava?
As a rabbi, what I've learned is that human relationships are really at the center of all dimensions of religion, holiness, and life itself. I certainly learned that this year, where we yearn to be together. So I bring that as a rabbi, but Karen, I also bring whatever my perspectives might be as a father of three and a grandfather of three children.
And this is about connections. We both want to bring connections to your families, to your children, to yourselves, and to your community. Rabbi, you wanted this word connection in our podcast title.
I did. Religion comes from a Latin word, which means connection. And we're all about that. Look, we're connected, you and I, Karen, in really beautiful ways. And we also try to connect people to each other.
And so we will be here every other Friday for Shabbat so that you can reset, find that pause that gives you space to breathe, to bring meaning into your lives, into our lives together. And so we can all share Ahava.
Ahava is a Hebrew word. The center of the word is Hav, and Hav means giving. So love is really about giving.
When you give a little Ahava, you make this world a better place. Here's our episode. Enjoy. Welcome to the first episode of the Language of Ahava podcast with Rabbi David Steinhardt.
Morning.
And me, Karen Deerwester. So it's pretty exciting that our very first podcast coincides with preparing for Rosh Hashanah. We're a few days or weeks away. And so what I want to know is Welcome to the first podcast of the Language of Ahava, a podcast for young families, and we are getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. So from an early childhood perspective and from our rabbi's perspective, hello, Rabbi Steinhardt.
Hi, Karen.
We are excited to launch us into meaning and a perspective of Ahava, the language of love. How do we connect to ourselves, our families, our children, our community, as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah? Rabbi, how in the world, with all of the insanity of back to school, of trying to figure out what it means to come together for the high holidays in this world this year, how do we prepare for this? What do we need to feel, think, do?
It's a pretty loaded question, but I think that everything that we ultimately want to give our children really starts with the home and starts with our relationships with our spouses and with our children together. So preparation, the whole concept of preparation is something that's really important for children to learn, not just for the holiday, but for all the tasks of life. You don't just go to school without getting your stuff together. You don't just go to school without the preparation that's necessary. And we learn that in our tradition also. There's preparation for just about every ritual that we do. In the Jewish tradition, this is a whole month of preparation that comes before Rosh Hashanah. So I think that the concept of preparation itself is important to teach. But okay, go on.
Mike, but help us differentiate, because what I fear, and one of the things I was thinking about preparing for this is, how do we separate preparation from anticipation, and anticipation being anxiety and worry? Like, oh my gosh, what's the new year going to bring? How awful might it be? What uncertainties might be there that are going to whack us on the side of the head and shake all of my confidence as a parent to keep my family and my world safe for this new year?
I'm a rabbi. I'm also a parent and a grandparent, but I also was someone's child at one point. And I learned something wonderful from my own mother and father, and that was optimism. So that they taught me that whatever the situation might be, we have to look forward and things can always be a little bit better, as it were. The very first Broadway show my parents took me to was a play called Ben Franklin in Paris. And the most important song in that musical was "Half the Battle is Learning to Smile." So I think it's really important, in spite of the difficulties of these times and the anxieties that we as parents might be feeling, it's also really important to project optimism, to project, sweetness. And that's kind of what's going on here with Rosh Hashanah. There's a year approaching us. The way we present to the kids might be a little bit different than the way we internalize it as adults. In fact, it should be. But I think our job as parents is to say, we're starting a new year. What do you want for this new year? Who do you want to see this new year? What kind of, things do we hope for in this new year? And keep it optimistic. Even the darkest times, have the possibility for light. And that's where we got to place ourselves.
And from a spiritual point of view, if you don't feel protection from something bigger than ourselves and this crazy world, you can feel the protection of a community, of not being alone and isolated in the struggles and the challenges. So that's why these two perspectives, I think, come together so meaningfully for young families. And I know from a parenting support point of view, you may not always feel enough. You may not always feel like you know enough. You may not always feel like you deserve to be on the pedestal that your children see you and put you on. But the reality is you are so enough, and feeling that center of calm that you then create for your families changes children. And yes, we have anxiety, and yes, we have fear, but we can manage that not dishonestly in front of our children, but in a different, authentic way that brings us to a kind of emotional intelligence, emotional calm, and the protection and support of community and being in this together.
In Hebrew, Karen, the word for security and trust is from the same root. They're essentially the same word. And so if we want to create security for our children, and we know how important that is for personality development, for their sense of self, then they have to know that they can trust us. And so we have to constantly let our kids know that we are there for them, that we are the trusting partner that they need in this world. Now, for adults who live in a world that can be very unpredictable, very random, right? We need to both be able to trust in our relationship with our loved ones, our family members. And also, for those who hold on to faith, there's got to be a trust in God, this sense that we can make sense out of this world, that even in the random nature of things, there's predictable aspects and we have agency. We can make things happen. And that's what we have to do together.
I have two more questions for you before we close this. One is that the holidays and the Jewish traditions give us an anchor in a way that I know for young children, when they are having tantrums, when they are overwhelmed, we have to be the calm outside of their storm. And hopefully Jewish community does that for grownups, that something is holding an anchor, holding a safety net when we are spinning and swimming and flailing. So we are posting this on Shabbat. Shabbat is an opportunity every week to reground and reset ourselves. I want you to say something about that. And then for the
Let's stop there. Let me say, hold on to your second question. Ritual grounds us. When we do something every Friday night, be it a prayer over challah, be it a blessing over wine, blessing our children, we feel grounded in the place where we're coming from. And that does create a sense of comfort and a sense of security. As we approach Rosh Hashanah, let's talk about what kind of a round challah we're going to make. Let's go online and shop for the different types of honeys that are available. And there's all different types of honey available. And that honey is about sweetness. We want our lives to be sweet. We want to experience sweetness in our family. So the rituals are so important. The blowing of the shofar, it's a wake up. This year's beginning, and this year's going to bring us hope.
Yes. All right. I'm not even going to ask my second question. I'm going to save it for another podcast because it's going to be about the turning and the coming home to ourselves that the new year brings, and the coming home to each other. So let's make that a wrap. Thank you, Rabbi. I am feeling a bit of optimism. And the only other thing I want to say is, if you're overwhelmed by the idea of Judaism and big traditions, what I can share is I came to Jewish traditions and Jewish community through the eyes of toddlers and the under 2 group. So I'm here to say, when you're thinking about that round challah, when you're thinking about all the sensory experiences, either of Shabbat or of the holidays, connect as your children will connect. And then you can set down those roots, not just for your children, but for yourselves. Any final thoughts, Rabbi?
There are a number of different greetings. L'shana tova, have a good year. L'shana tova u'mivarach, be good and blessed year. L'shana tova u'mituka, may it be a good and a sweet year. Thanks, Karen. Nice to be with you.
See you in a few weeks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
See you soon. Bye-bye.